Hey everyone, tonight we're going to walk into something that's been bothering me for a while. Have you ever seen someone vanish in plain sight? Not a dramatic abduction, not a chase, just gone. I did, in a church, and I haven't prayed the same way since. It was a night vigil, deep in the pine-covered countryside, the kind of place where signal bars fade and everyone leaves their shoes by the door. I was visiting this chapel as part of a wellness retreat I'd found on a sketchy website with good lighting and suspiciously glowing testimonials. I was doing research, at least that's what I told myself. But if I'm honest, I think I wanted to believe in something again. Anyway, the place was old. Cold stone walls, a single flickering light bulb above the altar. I remember someone handing me a candle and whispering, "Don't look behind you when the lights go out." Classic. Everyone chuckled, but not too hard. Around midnight, during a group prayer, a woman named Evelyn started trembling. She was right beside me, murmuring something under her breath, something that didn't match the words the rest of us were saying. The pastor continued without missing a beat. And then, she stood up. She didn't excuse herself, didn't signal distress. She just stood, turned, and walked toward the side exit, only it was bolted shut. I remember thinking she must have made a mistake, but she kept walking, arms hanging loose like she was being pulled, and then she disappeared. I swear on my last brain cell, she vanished 2 feet before reaching the wall. There wasn't a scream, just silence. No one moved. The guy leading the prayer paused for maybe half a second, then continued as if nothing had happened. That was the creepiest part. Afterward, I asked the woman behind me if she'd seen Evelyn leave. She blinked at me like I'd asked who painted the sky. "Who's Evelyn?" she said. "There's no Evelyn here." That would have been fine, except I found Evelyn's name written in a donation ledger later that night, and a purse under the pew we sat on, half-zipped with a half-eaten protein bar and a grocery list in it. I read the list 3 times. It had normal things on it: olive oil, dog food, cinnamon, but also extra white thread and backup copy of Room Key. I asked the pastor if I could help look for her. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "She's already been taken care of," he said. Now look, I'm not saying she evaporated into another dimension like she was in a dollar store version of Stranger Things. I'm saying no one followed up. No police report, no search, no concern. Just a vacant pew, a nameless purse, and the smell of cinnamon slowly turning metallic in my nose. Later that night, I wandered the grounds with a flashlight. There was a fenced garden behind the chapel, the kind that grows herbs you can't pronounce. I stepped closer, and that's when I heard it. A humming. Low and rhythmic, like someone chanting in reverse. It was coming from beneath the floorboards of a small tool shed nearby. Naturally, like a genius in a horror movie, I opened the shed. Inside were rows of tools, a stack of old hymnals, and a hatch. Yes, a hatch. Because why not, right? It was padlocked, but the lock was old, and what's curiosity without a little bolt cutter? I didn't have one, but I had a rock. 10 minutes later, my knuckles were bleeding and the padlock was off. I opened the hatch and peered down. Just earth. Freshly moved, faintly warm. There were symbols carved into the dirt. I didn't recognize any of them, except one. A spiral with a triangle inside it. I'd seen it once in a book about defunct doomsday sects. The caption had read, "Symbol used by groups believing in the Great Trade." According to that text, the Great Trade was an idea that to ascend spiritually, one must offer something, someone, back to the world. A human tithe. Historians still debate whether the symbol ever had an organized following or if it was simply repeated by unrelated fringe groups across centuries. I climbed out fast. Later, when I looked back at the prayer photo someone had snapped before Evelyn disappeared, I noticed something chilling. In the image, everyone was visible except her, just a soft distortion like heat above a fire. One woman, gone in the middle of prayer. No scream, no fuss, no follow-up, and no one remembered her, except me. That's how I knew I was in deep. This wasn't just a church retreat. This was something else, something older, something hungry. And I had a room booked for 2 more nights. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here, and I want to know, where are you listening from? Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. The next morning, Havenbrook Asylum looked exactly how I'd hoped it wouldn't. Intact enough to feel lived in, but abandoned enough to know something had gone very, very wrong. Ivy crawled up the stone, curling in thick ropes around second-floor windows like the building was being slowly devoured by the forest it stood in. Why was I here? Same reason I went to the chapel. Same reason I keep doing this to myself. Disappearances. This place had one that never made the news, at least not in any permanent way. A patient named Michael Wren, 27 years old, low risk, under full surveillance, vanished from a locked psychiatric wing in 1982. I had found an old, badly scanned PDF of a quarterly health report filed by the county, one sentence long. Patient Wren classified missing. Investigation inconclusive. That was it. Not even a footnote. As if he evaporated between meds. I parked the rental just outside the rusted gates. The air smelled like wet leaves and rusted metal, those two specific smells that always mean don't go in there. So of course, I did. The asylum's entrance was boarded, but I knew a side stairwell would take me in. You pick up these tricks after a few haunted house tours and one unfortunate urban exploration forum that gave me my first and hopefully last bout of lung mold. Inside was silent. Not abandoned silent, too silent. Like the building itself was listening. Peeling wallpaper. Wheelchairs frozen mid-turn. Nurses' desks stacked with dust-covered clipboards. And a tiny square room marked Treatment B that looked like someone had recently swept the floor. I remember looking down at the clean tiles and thinking, somebody still comes here. I was about to move on when I heard the laughter. Not children's laughter, thankfully. Just a man. Soft, rhythmic, almost like he was trying to mimic his own laugh and couldn't get it quite right. It echoed from deep inside the hallway marked East Wing Nonviolent Care. And guess what? That's exactly where Michael Wren had been kept. I stepped in. The hallway was lined with patient doors, thick oak frame sliding hatches, the kind of design meant to keep things in, not out. I stopped at room 214, his room. The door was shut. But the window slit was open. I looked in. Nothing, just dust and a tiny bed. But scrawled across the far wall in faint charcoal lines were 3 words, "He still dreams." At this point, my lizard brain was doing backflips. But I stayed. I noticed something else, those same spiral with triangle symbols scratched faintly into the floor. Not one. Dozens. Forming a kind of pathway. Now, here's where it gets weird. I followed the symbols down the hall toward a room that wasn't on the original building plans. I'd seen the blueprint earlier, and this wing was supposed to end at room 220. But there was another door, no label, no window, just a cold metal handle. I touched it. The air shifted. When I opened it, the hallway beyond was cleaner, the paint fresher. Lights flickered on with motion sensors, modern lights. A single hallway, stretching far too long for the space it should have occupied. And at the end, a glass door, the kind you see in sleep clinics or corporate dream research centers, with a keypad. I didn't have a code, of course, but someone else did, because the moment I stepped closer, it clicked open. Inside, the temperature dropped sharply. The air buzzed with soft white noise like a fan behind a wall. I saw beds. Modern, reclined, each with neural cap systems attached, like someone was still conducting tests here. And in one of them, a man was sleeping. I froze. He had the unmistakable look of someone who hadn't moved in decades. Tubes down his throat, skin translucent, marbled with blue veins, but alive, monitored, maintained, and taped to the wall behind him. A Polaroid! I took it down. It was a photo of the man in that same bed, 20 years younger, holding a journal. The name tag on the bed frame read Michael Wren. So, not missing? Not quite. I heard the hum shift, get closer. The fan noise turned into a soft, pulsing breath, and I felt it then like static pressure in my skull. He still dreams. I ran. I got out somehow. Maybe because I hadn't touched anything else. Maybe because he let me. Historians still debate whether facilities like Havenbrook were ever truly closed. Some were simply handed over, covertly repurposed for more experimental uses under the guise of decommissioning. The Wren case became a footnote for a reason. But here's what still keeps me up. When I later reviewed my photos, the Polaroid wasn't there. Gone from my bag, gone from the camera roll. But what was there? A photo I didn't take, just a picture of room 214, with me standing inside it, except I'd never stepped inside. That's when I realized this wasn't about finding people, it was about finding the places they never left, and I had 13 more of them to visit. I think the scariest part was how peaceful it looked. The commune had no name on the gate, just a hand-painted sign that read, "Leave what hurts at the door." Cute, right? Except the moment I stepped through that creaking fence, I knew something was off. Not just eerie, wrong in a way I couldn't put words to. The air smelled too clean, like filtered air from an underground lab pretending to be mountain breeze. Let's rewind. Back in 1974, dozens of people flocked to this place, a self-sustaining wellness farm deep in the foothills. Founded by a man named Carter Lyle, who claimed to receive healing visions from the earth. He promised salvation through fasting, communal sleep, and deep listening. If that sounds like a lot of vague brochure words, it is. But the numbers weren't vague. By 1980, over 90 residents had signed on for life. And then, radio silence. Tax filings stopped. Letters home vanished. Family members were turned away at the gates. And Carter, he released a single tape in 1982, just static and breathing. I came here to see what was left. Surprisingly, the place wasn't a ruin. The cabins still stood, paths still cleared. The central lodge had power. It was like they'd all just stepped out to pick herbs and never came back. Even the calendar above the stove was turned to July 1983. I stayed the night in a cabin marked Healer's Quarters. I found a folder of old intake forms, real paper, damp but readable. Lists of names, personal goals like break free from pain and silence the inner scream. That one made me nervous. Then I found something else, a map, hand-drawn with childish symbols. There were cabins, a goat barn, a greenhouse, but also something circled in red marker, the listening hole. Now, I don't know about you, but when someone in a communal cult draws a circle and labels it the listening hole, you don't go to it. So obviously, I went. It was tucked behind the orchard, hidden beneath an old swing set. Just a wooden hatch in the ground with a rope ladder descending into darkness. When I reached the bottom, I found a perfectly circular room carved into stone, lined with cushions, lit by small, flickering lanterns that looked suspiciously well-maintained. The walls were covered in charcoal drawings, spindly human shapes with massive ears and no mouths. Spirals, again, and one phrase repeated over and over, "When you listen long enough, the voice listens back." I sat in that room for maybe 5 minutes, no flashlight, no noise except the occasional drip of water from the stone, and then I heard it, a low whisper, not in my ears but behind them, like it was brushing against my thoughts, not my skin. I couldn't make out words, just a sound rhythmic and familiar, like the breathing from Havenbrook, like Evelyn's murmurs before she vanished. I stood up fast, too fast. Knocked into a lantern and almost started a fire, which probably would have been a mercy. I climbed out, heart thumping, but the hatch didn't close properly behind me. It just stayed open, like it was waiting for someone else. That night, back in the lodge, I found a photo album. Faded Polaroids labeled with dates and names, smiling faces, morning yoga, piles of fresh produce. The last photo in the book, though, was different. No label. Just a group standing in a circle around the listening hole, hands raised. One figure in the center, wearing all white, blindfolded. Then I looked closer and realized there were 92 people in the circle. But the intake forms only listed 89. Historians still debate whether the Lyle commune simply scattered without warning, or whether some kind of mass psychogenic event caused them to abandon their identities. Personally, I think they became the silence they were worshiping. Here's the weirdest part. As I left the property, my GPS stopped working. but not in a dead zone way. The map kept recalculating. No matter which direction I turned, it tried to send me back to the gate. I eventually had to use the stars to orient myself, like I was being looped, or like the commune wasn't done with me yet. When I finally made it back to town, I checked the property records. The land had never been sold, not officially. No taxes owed, no name listed, like the commune had never existed. Except I kept the map, the one with the listening hole circled in red. And now, late at night, I hear things when I try to sleep. Little whispers, breathing that isn't mine. You know those houses you just know not to enter? Even if the paint's fresh and the porch light's on, the kind that makes your spine flinch for no reason? That was the house with the blue door. It sat in a quiet neighborhood in western Georgia. Nice lawns, wind chimes, garden gnomes that probably voted. The house itself was ordinary, white siding, one floor, tidy hedge, except for the door. Bright, brilliant blue. Not navy, not robin's egg. It was that impossible cobalt that only exists in bad dreams and boutique candy. They called it a healing ministry. That's how it was listed in local records. New Wellspring Christian Restoration Ministry. No website, no business license, just word-of-mouth referrals and a P.O. box. And one persistent story. A boy named Casey who walked in and never came out. It was 1996. He was 8 years old. His mom brought him there after months of mysterious symptoms, nightmares, fevers, blackouts. The doctors couldn't find anything wrong. The ministry said it was spiritual interference. They offered a free restoration session, just 1 hour behind the blue door. That was the last time anyone saw Casey. No missing persons report, no outcry, just silence. His mother moved away, the neighbors stopped asking questions, and the ministry kept going. I visited on a Thursday. A small sign out front read, "Healing hours, noon to 4 p.m." I arrived at 11:59. A woman in her 60s answered. She wore a cardigan and sandals and smiled like she'd been waiting exactly for me. "You must be here for the restoration," she said. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. Inside, the air was strangely warm, like a space heater had been running nonstop, even though the day was mild. Soft gospel music floated from hidden speakers. I noticed right away that there were no photos, no Bibles, just empty frames and stacks of fresh guest towels. And in the hallway, the blue door. It looked newer up close. Almost. Wet, like it had just been painted but wasn't sticky. I felt cold standing in front of it, like the warmth of the house stopped exactly 1 inch from its frame. The woman asked if I'd like to step in. I played dumb. Just visiting. Her smile didn't waver. Everyone who visits ends up stepping in. I took a seat in the waiting room instead. Well, I pretended to. The moment she walked away, I slipped down the hall past the blue door and into the back of the house. And what I found was confusing. A room filled with children's toys. Clean, bright, but nothing modern. No electronics, no plushies beyond the early 90s. Wooden trains, rag dolls, one chair facing a blank television. Next door, a room with a small bed, still made. A calendar pinned to the wall was turned to August 1996. One date circled in red, the 19th. Casey's appointment date. I crept back to the blue door, tried the knob, locked. I pressed my ear to it, nothing. Then I heard it, a quiet tapping, like fingernails on the other side. 3 short knocks, a pause, then 2. It felt deliberate. Suddenly I wasn't alone. The woman was behind me. She didn't speak, didn't grab me, just smiled again and placed a hand on the doorframe. "He still hasn't finished healing," she whispered. I asked, "Casey?" She nodded. "He chose to stay. Some people do." I could have laughed, but the air had gone wrong again, heavy and metallic. My head felt like it was underwater. I turned and stumbled outside, heart racing, ears ringing. That night, back in my motel, I reviewed the old newspaper archives I downloaded. There were no obituaries for Casey, no school enrollment records after 1996, but the property tax filings for the house were strange. They'd been paid on time every year from an account listed as Wellspring, Child of God number 4. Not a person, a title. Historians still debate whether this ministry was part of a larger movement, possibly linked to Southern exorcism networks or radical child purity groups that operated off-grid during the late 20th century. But the blue door? No one can trace its origin. Some reports say it was painted only after Casey disappeared. I went back 1 week later. The house was gone. I don't mean sold, I mean leveled. Grass had grown in, a lone mailbox remained, rusted and unopened, no foundation, no debris, like it had never existed. But I checked satellite images. The house had been there the week before. And in my bag? A crayon drawing I never picked up. It was folded in my jacket pocket. A stick figure boy standing in front of a blue rectangle. A sun overhead. And scribbled in red, "I'm still here." That's when I realized I hadn't just found a door. I'd found a door waiting to be opened again. You ever watch someone disappear in real time and nobody says a word? That happened to me during a baptism. I was in Tennessee. Rural, wooded, the kind of place where Walmarts have their own town lore, and the churches outnumber gas stations 5-1. The building was called Second Mount Shepherd's Fellowship, though there wasn't a First Mount anywhere nearby. The church sat by a creek, all whitewashed siding, and a giant wooden cross made from a fallen telephone pole. They were holding an old-style baptism revival that week, open to anyone who felt moved by the Spirit. I came because this church had a strange footnote in a 1999 missing persons case. A young man named Harris Cray went missing just a day after getting baptized here. A minor detail, barely mentioned. But when I searched deeper, I found 4 more cases, all the same pattern. They all disappeared within 48 hours of being baptized. Some never made it home. One left a voicemail that just said, "I'm still wet," then nothing. So I attended. The service was intense, lots of singing, spontaneous shouting, people collapsing in tears. The preacher, Brother Fincher, was one of those guys with a voice like gravel and lightning. He didn't speak so much as declare. The baptisms were held in a creek just behind the chapel. Cold water, big crowd, no phones allowed during the ritual. So the Lord has your full attention. I still wore my recording pin. Not the first time I've broken a church rule. One by one, people stepped into the water. The preacher would raise his arms, say the words, dunk them, hold a moment longer than was strictly comfortable, then pull them back up. Applause. Amen. Hugs. It all seemed fine until she went in. A young woman, maybe early 20s. I never got her name. She stepped into the creek shivering. The sun had dipped behind the trees, and a low mist clung to the water like it was breathing. Brother Fincher said the prayer. She went under and never came back up. At first, no one reacted. I assumed she had fainted. But then he just stepped back. Empty hands. The water rippled. People clapped. No one noticed. No name was called. No towel prepared. The next person in line stepped forward. I felt frozen. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't tell if I just imagined it. That's how strange it felt, like reality had glitched, but only for me. The woman beside me handed me a dry robe and asked if I felt the pull yet. After the baptisms ended, everyone returned to the chapel for testimonies. I lingered by the creek, looked for footprints, looked for, I don't know what, a sign she had ever existed. And then I saw it. A necklace, simple leather cord, tiny silver pendant, caught on a branch near where she'd stood. I pocketed it. It felt warm. That night, I listened back to the audio from my pin. During her baptism, the preacher says, "Let the Spirit take what's owed." I replayed it 6 times. That phrase never came up in anyone else's dunking. So I did more digging. Turns out, the church was founded in 1972 by a man named Albert Trammell, who preached something called liquid surrender. He believed that full immersion allowed the water to keep what it chose. People said it was metaphorical. But the church quietly changed hands in the early 2000s, right after an investigation into ceremonial excesses. No charges, no arrests. But Brother Trammell moved to Costa Rica and never returned. Historians still debate whether liquid surrender was just flowery language or part of a deeper belief system linked to old Appalachian rites about returning to the earth through holy water. Some claim this belief predates Christianity in the region. Here's what stuck with me. I went back to the creek 2 days later. The water was still. I tossed a small pebble into the same spot she'd vanished. It never made a splash, just vanished beneath the surface like it had fallen into velvet. I left that night. Couldn't sleep. I kept hearing water dripping, but I was in a motel room on the second floor. No sink running, nothing wet. When I finally checked my bag the next morning, I found my clothes damp. Every shirt, every sock, as if they'd been baptized without me. And the necklace? Gone. In its place, a note tucked inside my bag. She's not missing. She was chosen. Yeah, no thanks. I still can't look at rivers the same way, and I don't go near creeks alone, especially not in Tennessee. I know what you're thinking. Maybe I'm imagining things. Maybe I'm reading too much into these disappearances. But this one chilled me to my molars because the guy was never supposed to exist. Let me set the scene. I was attending a weekend health conference up in Oregon. One of those new age retreats where they blend science with ancient light energy and serve smoothies made from mushrooms you definitely shouldn't Google. You know the type. Yoga at sunrise, Reiki at noon, and a sound bath where someone bangs a metal bowl and swears it's rebalancing your mitochondria. The retreat center sat by a lake, isolated, serene, and aggressively beige. The event was called the Embodied Energy Summit, and yes, it's as vague as it sounds. I was there to poke around, dig for oddities, and maybe snag a lead for a section on health cults with good marketing. And that's where I met him. I first noticed him during the group icebreaker. 6 foot something, messy beard, tan zip-up hoodie, eyes like he was on day 4 of no sleep. Everyone called him Quinn. Just Quinn. He didn't talk much, but people clearly knew him. He shared during a group circle about how vibrational detox helped him after his brother disappeared. Said he'd been coming to the summit for 3 years. That stuck with me, especially the brother part. Quinn and I chatted that night near the fire pit. He asked me if I'd ever felt like my body was trying to leave without me. I told him only when I eat gas station sushi. He didn't laugh. Then he asked, "Would you try the Prism Room?" That was a no for me. See, the Prism Room was this sealed cabin on the edge of the property, no windows, just a hexagon with mirrored walls and a skylight. They claimed it tuned your cells to celestial rhythms. People stayed in there for hours. Some came out crying. One guy last year allegedly walked straight into the lake afterward and kept going until someone pulled him out. Quinn told me he had a 1 a.m. slot, said it was the thin hour when the veil between frequencies was weakest. Classic spooky nonsense. I asked him if I could join. He smiled. "You can't watch a tuning fork work. You are the fork," he said. Yeah, that's a line I'll never forget. Next morning, I noticed something odd. No Quinn at breakfast, or yoga, or breath work. By lunch, I asked one of the coordinators if they'd seen him. "Who?" "Quinn," I said. "Tall guy, zip-up hoodie, Prism Room last night?" She looked confused. Flipped through the attendance roster. His name wasn't there. Not for this year. Not for any year. In fact, they'd never had a Quinn register. Ever. That wasn't even the weird part. I checked my room. The disposable name tag from the first night? It was gone. But left in its place was a note, handwritten on the back of a summit program. "You heard me. That's enough." I reported him missing anyway, filed a police report, showed them the note. The officer asked if I had a photo. I didn't. My phone camera app had crashed during the summit. Not once, but twice. And the fire pit photo someone had taken of the group? Quinn wasn't in it. There was a space beside me, just empty bench and shadow. Still not convinced? Here's where it spirals. A week later, back home, I received a USB in the mail, no return address, just a crystal sticker on the envelope. It contained a single video, night vision footage from the Prism Room, timestamped 1:06 a.m. There's Quinn sitting cross-legged, breathing, then twitching, then gone. I mean it. Gone. There's no cut, no blur, no camera trick. One frame, he's there. The next, just empty mirror and a faint pulse of light at the center of the room. Then nothing. Historians still debate whether certain fringe health movements intentionally remove individuals during cleansing ceremonies, though no proof has ever stuck. One FBI report mentions an untrackable pattern of retreat-associated vanishings, mostly attributed to mental breaks or wilderness accidents. But this wasn't that. Quinn knew he was going, and I think he wanted me to see it. Later that month, I received another envelope. No note. Just a name tag, the kind they gave out at the summit. It said Quinn in all caps. I never found out his last name, but sometimes when I'm half asleep, I hear his voice in my head. You can't watch the tuning fork. You are the fork. And then I wake up with static ringing in my ears and the overwhelming urge to walk into mirrors. I should have turned back the moment I saw the gate. It was cast iron, carved with symbols I didn't recognize, swirls, thorns, what looked like a spoon if the spoon hated you. The village beyond it didn't even have a name on the sign. Just, welcome to home. That's it. Home. Like it wasn't a place you arrived, it was where you belonged, whether you liked it or not. This one came from a dead-end thread on a genealogy site. A man had posted frantically in 2008, asking about his grandfather's hometown, saying he visited and all the old people were gone. Just gone. He listed this village, tucked in the Ozarks, as the location. Then he deleted his account, but not before someone archived his post. Which is how I found it. Every elder over 80 had vanished in a single night. Naturally, I had to see it for myself. The village was beautiful. Log homes, flowering trees, hand-paved paths, too beautiful. Think retirement brochure meets the Stepford Wives. People smiled too much. No pets, no mailboxes. I stayed with a local named Nellie Mae, who ran a guest cottage and brewed grounding tea that tasted like warm gravel. I asked about the elders. She gave me a tight-lipped smile. They've been called. That's capital C called, in case you missed it. Red flag number 17. Nellie Mae let me stay in a spare cottage that used to belong to a man named Mr. Carlin, age 93 when he vanished. The place was pristine, made bed, dusted bookshelves, alarm clock still ticking, and on his nightstand, a note handwritten in perfect cursive. I've heard the tone. I'm ready. There was no phone number, no address book, just that note and a single cassette tape labeled the 9th tone. Now look, I know better. I do. But I found a tape player and listened. At first, it was silence. Then a hum deep and vibrating, like it was crawling across my spine. Then another layer, like a voice, but mechanical, speaking in reverse or maybe underwater. I yanked the tape out and felt blood trickle from my right ear. Fun. That night, the village held what they called the gathering. I wasn't invited, obviously, but I followed the lights, paper lanterns strung through the forest, leading to a meadow with stone pillars arranged in a loose circle. There were about 40 villagers. No music. No fire. Just humming. Same tone as the tape. In the center stood 4 people, all older, though none appeared to be 80 yet. One by one, they were handed something from a wooden box, a silver earpiece shaped like a spiral. Each person placed it in their left ear. Then the villagers began to chant, not words, just syllables. Their bodies swayed. The 4 in the center stood motionless. One by one, they slowly sat down, closed their eyes, and stopped breathing. No panic. No alarm. The villagers smiled. Humming faded. Then everyone walked away. The bodies left where they sat. The next morning, the meadow was empty. No bodies. No earpieces. Not even footprints. I asked Nellie Mae about it at breakfast. She stirred her tea and said, "Those called early are our guides. They wait for us." That night, I found something under Mr. Carlin's bed. A letter addressed to his granddaughter. It read, "My dear, if you come and I am gone, do not stay long. The tone only gets louder." Historians still debate whether these disappearances were coordinated, possibly a form of ritual euthanasia disguised as cultural tradition, or something more supernatural. The term the 9th tone appears in obscure musical theory texts, often associated with unstruck notes believed to bridge sound and silence. I tried to leave the next morning, but my car didn't start. Then Nellie Mae offered a ride in her truck. Old, squeaky, smelled like lavender and mothballs. She dropped me at the bus station 2 towns over. As I stepped out, she smiled and handed me a small box. "For the road," she said. I waited until I got home to open it. Inside was a cassette. no label. I haven't played it, but sometimes I hear that tone again. Not from the tape, from somewhere else, in the spaces between words, in the quiet between breaths, like something is tuning me, whether I like it or not. You ever meet someone who speaks with too many teeth? That's how I felt the first time I sat across from Loretta Doone, the last known member of a group once called the Disciples of the Salt Diet. She was in her 80s but looked 50, skin stretched tight like she'd been airbrushed by regret. Her smile didn't crack once during the entire interview. This wasn't your average wellness cult. It started as a nutritional fellowship in southern Utah in the 1960s, centered around the idea that salt was sacred. Not just good for you, sacred. Divine essence of the earth, sacred. Followers believed that ingesting only salted foods, no sugar, no fruit, no water, would cleanse the spirit of ancestral burdens. Yeah. Dehydration with a theological twist. They built a small settlement called Silted Grace in the high desert made from salt bricks and old trailers. No running water, no outsiders. People disappeared into that place, and only Loretta ever came out. She agreed to talk to me under one condition. I bring her a salt block the size of my fist. Pink Himalayan only, she said. White salt is too forgiving. Okay, I met her in a tiny rental house with blackout curtains and a bathtub full of dry sand. She poured salt into a teacup and sipped it like coffee. I gagged just watching. Everyone else left, she said, but not all in the same way. She told me they didn't eat for the last 10 days. Only salt, no water, just the mineral inheritance. People started vanishing after the 7th day, not dying, vanishing. One moment they'd be meditating in the circle, the next a shimmer in the air, a crunch in the dirt, and gone. Loretta was the last to go in, but she claims she didn't leave. I was too impure, she said. The salt spit me back out. I asked what she meant. She pulled out a journal, pages warped from salt absorption, and showed me the final entry of their leader, a man named Owen Belm. The entry read, "Sure, on the 9th intake they shimmer. On the 11th they depart. I will salt the last door tonight." I didn't get it, until she showed me the floorboards in her living room. Underneath was a crate. Inside, a perfectly preserved salt door. An archway, carved with sigils, brittle and cold to the touch. I leaned in to take a closer look, and I swear to you, there was a shadow on the other side. Not mine, not hers. Just a humanoid absence pressed against the other side of the door. Then it was gone. I asked if she ever tried to open it. Loretta shook her head. It only opens when you've given enough. I asked what happened to the rest of the group, 32 people unaccounted for. She smiled, too many teeth again, and said they were chosen to be preserved. They became the salt. Historians still debate whether Silted Grace was a true religious movement or simply a case of mass starvation hallucination. But a recent dig uncovered hundreds of bones just beneath the topsoil, small ones, knuckle joints, teeth, all encrusted in sodium, no skulls. That night, I stayed at a motel 30 miles from her place. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I tasted salt in my mouth, not like ocean water. This was sharp, metallic, like blood filtered through sand. I dreamed of a man in a white robe, standing in a field of salt pillars. He held a bowl. Inside it, a heart, crystallized. When I woke up, my lips were cracked and the motel mirror was fogged with salt residue, like someone had exhaled brine onto it while I slept. And on the mirror, in faint streaks, more. I never saw Loretta again. Her house was empty a week later. No forwarding address. The neighbor said she'd evaporated, then laughed, like it was a joke. But the police found no trace of her. Just a teacup of salt still warm. And that door? Gone. I still carry the salt block she asked for. I don't know why, but lately it's been shrinking. You know that feeling when you're being watched, but there's no one there? Now imagine that feeling inside a hospital that technically doesn't exist. I came across the name St. Kilda's Retreat while searching through international missing persons databases. It was listed on an Australian case from 2003, a teenage boy named Nathan who vanished during a family holiday. His sister claimed he'd checked himself into a place near the cliffs, but no such place appeared on any map. No website, no registration, no photos. And yet 3 separate disappearances listed the same location as the last place visited, St. Kilda's Retreat, southern coastline. Locals near the southern edge of Victoria said it was a myth. Others claimed it was a decommissioned mental facility from the 1940s. A few just gave me weird looks and walked away. But I found it. Or rather, it found me. One night I was driving along the coast, looking for an Airbnb that had gone mysteriously offline after I booked it. The road twisted through hills and empty fields until I saw a small wooden sign nailed to a tree. St. Kilda's Retreat. Restoration beyond the body. No arrows, no lights, but a dirt path curved off the main road like it had always been there. I followed it. The hospital was more like a compound. Long, pale buildings with moss-covered roofs. Stone walls. Iron beds visible through cracked windows. It smelled like lavender and bleach, like someone tried really hard to convince you they cleaned something horrifying. The front entrance was unlocked. A bell above the door jingled when I stepped in, and instantly everything was silent, not quiet, silent. No wind, no insects, no distant cars, just nothing. At the reception desk sat a young woman in a white uniform. She had no name tag, no phone, just a clipboard. "Checking in?" she asked, already writing. I said I was looking for someone who had stayed there, Nathan. Her smile didn't move her eyes. "Everyone checks out when they're ready." I asked for records. She handed me a file, thin. Inside were names, handwritten in the same tight cursive, all followed by dates. Then a final column, reassigned. I asked what that meant. She blinked. "Healers don't always need bodies." Okay. I walked the halls. The rooms were pristine, but clearly not updated since the 1950s. Metal cabinets, faded posters, beds with restraints. I heard faint humming behind one door, someone whistling a lullaby I almost recognized. I knocked. No answer. I opened it. The room was empty, except for a hospital gown hanging on a coat hook and a photograph on the floor. Black and white. A group of staff standing proudly. One of them looked exactly like the woman at the front desk. Same face, same smile. The photo was dated 1947. I left immediately. Outside, the silence was worse, pressed against your skull like wet wool. I turned back to take a final photo of the building, but it wasn't there. Not gone, just shifted. The colors had changed. The bricks looked new. Windows gleamed. The sign now read St. Kilda's Wellness Lodge. I blinked again, and it was back to how it was. That night, I drove 3 hours inland and checked into a cheap motel. At 3:11 a.m., I got a call from an unlisted number. When I answered, I heard one thing, a boy's voice whispering. They made me clean the light. Then static. Then a dial tone. I traced the number. It bounced through 5 disconnected towers. Historians still debate whether St. Kilda's ever existed as a registered institution or was part of a shadow network of spiritual restoration clinics built during wartime for soldiers suffering from psychosis. Rumors persist of facilities designed to separate pain from the host. There's no record of Nathan ever checking out. But last week I received a postcard from an address in Norway. Blank, except for 4 words, reassigned. I'm cleaner now. It was signed N, no last name, no return address, but the stamp was real, and on the back, barely visible under UV light, was a faint image of a hospital room with my face in the mirror. There are places you find once, and then they find you again. This one started as a side note, legal deposition. A sealed court case from 1996 declassified for exactly 36 hours before someone sealed it again. But in those 36 hours, I saw the name, the Hawthorne Home for Collective Rebalancing, and under it a list of missing persons, all from the same family, 7 of them, all surnamed Glass. Apparently, the Glass family enrolled voluntarily in what was supposed to be a wellness retreat/grief therapy center in upstate New York. They were mourning the patriarch who had died under mysterious circumstances, struck by lightning inside his own kitchen, if you can believe that. The retreat was built on ancestral land, promised to realign generational imbalance. That's fancy speak for if your granddad messed up, we'll scrub it out of your DNA with crystals and guided breathwork. Yeah, only the Glass family never came home. When local authorities tried to investigate, the Hawthorne staff claimed the family had moved on to the upper program, but they couldn't or wouldn't provide an address. All belongings were gone, beds made, journals burned in the fire pit. Here's where it gets weird. That same month, a man named Eli Glass was caught shoplifting protein bars at a gas station 3 towns over. Same name, same age as the youngest son, listed as 17 at the time of disappearance. But when questioned, he had no fingerprints. Literally. His hands were smooth, scarless, and clean, like they'd never touched anything. He told the officer, and I quote, "This isn't the me I was, but it's the me they gave back." He then collapsed and never regained consciousness. Hospital tests showed a complete reset of his gut biome, something only possible with full organ transplants or apparently whatever they were doing at Hawthorne. I drove out to the property. The buildings were gone. Just foundation stones and a central courtyard overgrown with vines. In the middle was a sculpture made of intertwined hands, 7 of them, carved beneath, "Give us what burdened you," broken wafferings, broken watches, a father's tie, teeth in a little velvet pouch. I pitched my tent nearby and stayed overnight. At 2:12 a.m., I woke to whispers. No, not whispers, chanting. Soft and rhythmic. It came from underground. I followed the sound to a root cellar built into the hillside. Inside, damp stairs descended into total darkness. About 10 steps down, my flashlight flickered and died. Of course it did, but the chanting continued. I sat, listened, and after a few minutes, it wasn't frightening, it was comforting. That's the dangerous part, because I almost went further. Almost. But I remembered the statue, the 7 hands, and I remembered there were no flashlights in the grave. I climbed back up and slept in my car. Historians still debate whether the Hawthorne home was a cult, a therapeutic commune, or a rogue psychiatric facility. Some suspect military experimentation on identity restructuring. Others believe it was based on a fringe therapy called pattern release, designed to sever inherited trauma by symbolically and physically removing people from their genealogical scripts. The next morning, I found a new offering had been added to the statue, a notebook. It belonged to the mother, Janet Glass. Her handwriting was neat, the final entry underlined 3 times. I gave them everything, even the parts I didn't know were mine. Later, while reviewing the court documents again, I noticed something else, a postscript. Someone had handwritten the words, "returned as new," with a single fingerprint in salt pressed next to it. I compared it to Eli's autopsy files. It didn't match, and the print wasn't human. Ever hear about those people who vanish only to reappear years later, but they're not quite right? This next one haunted me more than most, because I met him. Back when I was compiling old interviews for a podcast that never aired, I came across a guy named Tomasz Ruda. His voice was flat but sharp, like someone reading a recipe for poison. He was recorded in 1984 in Krakow, Poland, during an inquiry into a long-defunct commune known only as the Waking Elm. Tomasz claimed to be the only survivor of a spiritual alignment camp set up by the Brotherhood of the Elm, a quiet but persistent group tied loosely to early 20th century mysticism. Their focus? Transconscious group dreaming. Yeah, dream therapy, but organized. They believed that if enough people slept in sync beneath the same tree on the same lunar cycle, they could ascend together into something better. Except they never woke up. 17 members slept in what they called the Grove of Remembrance, a real place about 40 kilometers outside Krakow. Hand-built cabins, no electricity, one massive elm tree in the center with rope beds tied to the roots. Tomasz told officials he left the camp in 1977, 7 years after everyone else went silent. No one had heard from them since. When they finally went to investigate, the cabins were still there. Everything looked frozen in time, meals half prepared, books open mid-sentence, firewood stacked neatly. But no bodies, just rope beds, still made. and one journal. It belonged to a woman named Helena who wrote obsessively about the crossings. She described how each sleeper would pass into a mirror state where their dreams interlocked. She claimed they were building a community inside the mind, shaped from memory, bound by sleep. Helena's last entry? Tomasz refuses to sink. We worry he will fracture the garden. Years later, I tracked him down, somehow still alive, living in a nursing home under a different name. He was blind, but he recognized me. You heard them too, didn't you? He said, before I even introduced myself. I didn't know how to answer. He claimed that when the group reached critical dreaming mass, they had begun to pull real things into their shared sleep. He saw someone's dead mother walk into their dream camp one night, then watched her face the next morning, perfectly sketched in the frost on the window. He said they could taste food from each other's pasts. But then the dreams turned. Helena's entries got darker. Descriptions of someone else entering the dream. A man in all gray, faceless, who walked between the cabins but never left footprints. He brings keys we never made, she wrote. People started to fall into silent sleep. Tomasz said it was like a second layer, deeper than dreaming, but without memory. One by one, they faded. So he left. Just walked out of the grove in the middle of the night and never looked back. Except he never really woke up either. I asked what that meant. He held up his hand. This isn't mine, he said. It was marked with a birthmark in the shape of a perfect circle, except Tomasz had no birthmark there before. Records confirmed it. I stayed in that village for 2 more nights. I hiked to the grove myself. The elm tree was still there, but it wasn't alive. It was perfectly preserved, no rot, no sap, just dry, uncracked bark that sounded hollow when I knocked. I left an audio recorder overnight near the roots. When I played it back, I didn't hear wind or birds or insects. I heard breathing. 17 people, in sync, inhale, exhale, soft murmurs, the sound of turning in sleep. Historians still debate whether the waking elm was a form of mass hypnosis, an experimental dream commune, or just another death cult with poetic delusions. Some believe Tomasz invented the entire thing. But when I ran a thermal scan over the site, the tree gave off heat, about 3.7 degrees Celsius warmer than the surrounding area. And right beneath the root system, I saw faint outlines. 17 human shapes, curled in fetal positions, undisturbed. No one's allowed to dig there now. The land is protected by something called the Cultural Dreaming Trust, funded anonymously. Tomasz died in 2016, or maybe he just finally woke up. The last thing he ever said to a nurse was, "Tell them the man in gray has the key." I don't know what door he meant, but sometimes when I'm half asleep, I dream of a grove with a single elm tree in the center and a man in gray holding a key. Do you remember the story about the girl who disappeared at her own family reunion? No? Probably because they erased it. This one takes us to the hills of northern Japan, to an obscure clan gathering in the town of Kurogi, where members of the Saito family held a once-a-decade ceremony known as the returning line. The ritual was old, ancient even, said to realign the roots of the family tree. It was only practiced by the direct descendants of the Saito bloodline, who traced their ancestry back to a feudal warlord believed to have made a pact with something less than human. In 2005, a 14-year-old girl named Aiko Saito vanished during the closing night of the ceremony. The family claimed she left to study abroad, but no passport was issued. Her school records were deleted. All her childhood photos were removed from the house. But here's the kicker. I found a printed family photo from the reunion, one that somehow escaped the purge. There was a blank spot in the lineup. Everyone was smiling, except one woman who stared straight at the camera with a terrified look. Her hand was outstretched, mid-motion, like she just touched something that wasn't there anymore. You can see her fingertips curl into empty space. The entire family posed in front of an old shrine called Akashi no Ie, a half-buried structure accessible only by crawling under a low rock arch. It was rumored to contain the remains of the first Saito, A man who was said to have vanished into shadow and returned with a mouth full of names he shouldn't have known. That's where they held the final part of the ritual. When I got to Kurogi, the shrine was chained off with a rusted government warning, dangerous foundation, entry forbidden. But the villagers didn't seem to care. One old man told me, every generation gives one. It's the price for memory. I asked what that meant. He tapped his head. You see your mother when you look in the mirror. That's a kind of haunting. Creepy poetry aside, I found a hidden entry. Under the arch was a narrow tunnel, just enough room to crawl. The air was cold, unnaturally cold, and dry like a desiccated cellar. The walls were carved with symbols that looked like tangled family trees, but with certain branches scratched out. About halfway in, I found a bundle of cloth. It was a child's yukata, faded blue with cherry blossoms. Inside the fold, a necklace. The pendant was shaped like a tiny door, and it was warm, even though everything else was freezing. I turned back. Good choice, right? Except when I emerged from the tunnel, it was dusk. I had gone in at noon. 5 hours gone in what felt like 20 minutes. Back at the village, people stared. One woman dropped a bag of groceries when she saw me, because they recognized me. Apparently, I looked just like Uncle Takeru, who went missing during the previous returning line in 1995. One of them showed me an old group photo. It was me. Same face, same strange pendant, but 20 years earlier. I stayed one more night. Couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., I heard music, flute and drum, low and echoing like it was being played from an underground. I followed it to the shrine. The chain was gone, the tunnel glowed faintly, and inside it I saw shadows, figures bending forward, reaching out. One of them was a girl with a cherry blossom yukata. She didn't look scared. She looked peaceful, and she whispered something I'll never forget. Someone has to stay so the rest can remember. I left Kurogi the next morning, but every photo I took had been wiped, replaced with static, and that necklace gone from my bag. In its place was a folded note, handwritten in kanji I barely understood. Roughly translated, we return to remain. We vanish to continue. Historians still debate whether the Saito rituals were a form of selective memory preservation, ancestral veneration, or symbolic sacrifice. Some argue it's metaphor, giving up a part of yourself to preserve the family identity. Others believe it's literal. The records from Kurogi show a pattern. Every 10 years, one disappears. No birth certificate ever issued, no grave ever made. But their names, carved inside the shrine, 17 so far. The last one, Aiko Saito, and under her name, scratched faintly into the stone, I remember you. You ever meet someone who remembers a past that never happened? I once sat next to a man on a flight from Helsinki who swore he had 2 sets of memories. Both felt real. Both had full, separate lives. He could tell you his second daughter's birthday, but also remembered her being an only child. His name was Marcos Ruel, and I bring him up because his case connected to one of the strangest disappearances I've ever come across. This one happened in 1981 at a private neurological wellness facility in Argentina called Casa de Lázaro. On paper, it was a luxury rehab retreat, but the government believed it was actually testing experimental treatments on trauma victims. Not illegal, but deeply questionable. The program's name was Resonancia de la Sangre, blood resonance. Sounds like a metal band, I know. Their goal was memory purification, removing inherited trauma through deep state-induced trance work and genetic feedback loops. Marcos was a participant, so were 11 others, all from the same extended family, the Ruel line. On the 6th night, the staff recorded something strange, a synchronized murmuring across all patients at 2:44 a.m. The words were nonsense, guttural phrases in broken Latin, but it happened every night for 6 days. On the 7th night, 10 of the patients vanished. Just gone. Beds empty. No security breaches. No footprints. Surveillance cameras showed static between 2:43 and 2:45 a.m., and when the feed resumed, only Marcos and a nurse remained. That nurse died of a brain aneurysm within the hour. Marcos woke up 36 hours later and immediately asked for his brother. He didn't have one. But he insisted. Name, age, birthday, favorite food, even a story about building a treehouse together. And here's the part that chills me. He drew a photo, not a drawing, a photo, graphite photorealism, the man's face, down to the mole on his neck, smiling, holding a cake, a perfect 80s birthday party shot. One problem? The man he drew exactly matched one of the vanished patients. And that guy wasn't his brother. He was a distant cousin living abroad at the time. I visited Casa de Lázaro years later. It's a ruin now, windows busted, vines everywhere. But some of the patient files were still intact in a waterproof safe under the main stairwell, and one of them showed the cousin's intake notes, scrawled in the margins. Thinks Marcos is his younger brother. Delusional pairing? It wasn't just Marcos. Several of them believed they were directly related in ways that contradicted DNA. It's like they rewrote their own genealogies, not just mentally, cellularly. Blood tests from that final week? Marcos's genome had markers consistent with all the others. Historians still debate whether blood resonance was a rogue genetic therapy, a psychic link experiment, or a botched consciousness merger. Some even believe the 10 vanished because they fully synced and collapsed into one consciousness too large to stay embodied. I know, sounds absurd, but I looked at Marcos's medical scans. His hippocampus, the part that stores long-term memory, was enlarged. Not just a little, almost 40% more volume than the human average. Doctors said it was impossible. He shouldn't have been able to walk or speak or even exist. But he did, until 1996, when he went to sleep and never woke up. At the funeral, a woman showed up with a little girl. Said she had no connection to the family, but her daughter drew pictures of Marcos's other life, sketches of a house he never owned, drawings of a brother she claimed she used to be. One had a caption written in a child's messy handwriting. He said he'd remember me next time. I still have that drawing. Sometimes when I look at it, I feel something strange. Not fear, not confusion. Recognition, like I'm forgetting someone I haven't met yet. Casa de Lázaro is sealed now. A chemical fire in 2003 melted most of the files. But in a nearby chapel on a scorched wall, you can still faintly see the words etched by heat. Where the blood remembers, the body follows. So next time someone swears they remember a life that doesn't match the records, maybe, just maybe, they're right. You'd think royalty disappears quietly. You'd be wrong. Our next case comes from southern India, buried in the crumbling estates of a once powerful clan, the Vanuatu line, rulers of a forgotten princely state whose lineage supposedly ended in the 1940s. But if you look into it, the records are a little too neat. No last wills, no posthumous land grants, just a flat line like the family blinked out of existence. Except they didn't. Because I found someone who claims she saw one of them alive in 2017. A woman named Ahalia, a government archivist, told me a man in full royal dress arrived at her office just before Diwali. He requested land titles from 1836 and spoke fluent court Tamil, a dialect that hadn't been spoken publicly in nearly a century. He signed in the guest book, Adhiraj Vanuatu Sikh, then vanished. No trace. Security footage was corrupted. The pen he used was missing from the sign-in desk, but Ahalia swore the smell of sandalwood and camphor lingered for days. Curious, I dug into the Vanuatu Palace records. They're stored in a private library at the University of Chennai behind 2 locked doors, and a gate reads, "For eyes of kin only." But hey, I've gotten into worse places. What I found was chilling. Every 50 years, a ceremony called Vidu Parapu, literally house rebirth, was held. No photos, no public notice, just a single document listing the participants. And in the final entry from 1946, there's a note: to remain blood, we must step outside time. Now, I know what you're thinking. It sounds like royal nonsense, metaphor, pageantry. But here's where things get weird. Again, a student archivist named Mahul told me about a sealed well beneath the old Vanuatu estate. Said local kids believed it was cursed. Anything thrown in came back. Changed. He'd once dropped in a Matchbox car. The next morning it was sitting on his pillow, melted. bent like it had been aged 100 years. When I finally visited the well, it was dry, moss-covered, smelled like cold iron and rot. On the inner stone wall were handprints, dozens of them, layered over each other, all pressed outward. Not in, outward, as if trying to climb back out. The legend? Every half-century, the ruling bloodline entered the well as a rite of rebirth. Not metaphorically, literally. They disappeared, to return once the line required renewal. They called it the severance. I found one more note, handwritten in faded ink, slipped inside a ceremonial scroll. It read, "Only those who forget the throne may wear its weight." Historians still debate whether the Vanuatu disappearances were political exile, spiritual retreat, or something darker. Some say it was elite interdimensional travel. I know, wild. Others believe it was a form of living history preservation, locking the royal bloodline in suspended timelines, only letting them re-enter the world when balance demanded it. I don't know which theory I believe, but I do know this. In 2022, a man wearing Vanuatu crest robes appeared at a train station in Sri Lanka. He didn't speak. He just handed the clerk a gold coin from the 1800s with a carving of a two-faced lion. And on the rim, it was etched, "We never left, you simply forgot." He then walked into the jungle and never came back. No footprints, no sightings, just a coin that now lives in a vault in Colombo. But sometimes when the lights flicker, the security cam at the vault catches a flicker of red silk and someone standing in the corner. You ever meet a family that feels wrong? Not evil, not dangerous, just off, like they're acting out a memory that isn't theirs. This last one comes from northern Scotland, in a glen so remote it doesn't appear on GPS, Glen Bragg, and at the center of it was the Moreach clan, a family with no birth records, no public photos, and no consistent surnames. Locals called them the Everborn. I met them in 2019 while hiking. Got caught in a fog so thick I couldn't see my hands. I followed the sound of bells and ended up in a clearing with 5 stone houses, old but lived in. Smoke curling from the chimneys, wind chimes made from tiny bones. They greeted me politely, spoke softly, asked me no questions, offered me a place to stay. Of course I said yes. That's the kind of decision you make when you're too cold to care about your instincts. That night, we had a quiet dinner. Root stew, flatbread, elderflower tea. I noticed they all looked a little similar. Same pale eyes, same hands, thin fingers like bird bones wrapped in velvet. And when I asked how many people lived in the glen, the eldest woman said, "Always the same, never more, never less." There were 11 of them. Later that night, I woke up to chanting. Low, rhythmic, almost like breath, amplified. I peeked outside. They were standing in a circle, holding hands around a fireless pit, and in the middle, slowly rising from the earth, was a figure, or the outline of one. But it wasn't forming, it was fading, like watching smoke get sucked back into the ground. At dawn, there were only 10 of them, and nobody said a word, not a single reaction. The extra place setting at the table was gone, even the chair. But here's the kicker. When I left the glen the next morning, I took a wrong turn and ended up back at the same clearing. Only this time, it was abandoned. Ruined. The chimneys were collapsed, the doors broken, no smoke, no sound. I checked my phone. The date had changed by 3 weeks. I called the local ranger station. They said the Moreach homestead had been deserted since 1932 after a landslide buried part of the glen. 11 members of the family were presumed dead. No bodies were ever recovered. But here's what's really creepy. In the town archives, I found a census record from 1872. 11 names. In 1922, 11. In 1972, again, 11. Same names, same ages. Repeating every 50 years like a clock. Historians still debate whether the Moreach were victims of a geological anomaly, a cloistered cult, or something older, something that rewrote itself into history again and again. Some believe the family made a pact, binding themselves to a fixed loop in time to preserve memory. Others say they're not people at all, but avatars of an ancient entity that uses human form as a mask. I don't know. But a few months after my visit, I got a letter. No return address. Inside was a photo, sepia-toned, faded. 11 people standing in a misty field, all smiling, all looking straight at me. One of them was me. Same jacket, same backpack, same tired expression. On the back of the photo, scrawled in elegant handwriting, "You stayed once, you'll stay again." I've never been back to Scotland, but sometimes when I close my eyes in the fog, I hear the bells. And I wonder if somewhere in that forgotten glen, the Moireach are still there, waiting for someone to vanish, so the rest can remain. Okay, let's slow it down now. You made it. Through whispers in the shrine, through wells that remember blood, through clans that count time differently than we do. Your eyes are heavy. Let them be. You don't need to hold on to the details right now. You don't need to remember the exact dates or names, just the feeling, like standing in the dark with someone just behind you, but peacefully so. Think about the faces we met, the ones who stepped away from the world, not because they were taken, but because they chose something else. A pause, a reset, a promise kept too long. You're safe here. The stories are closing their eyes too. The air is soft now, like a wool blanket pulled just under your chin. Your breath is slow, gentle. If someone's missing from your life, maybe they're just in a different story, a few pages ahead or behind, still turning. No need to chase them now. Let them be. Let you be. You did good tonight, so rest. End of script. Good night.